October 27, 1962, the world came closer to nuclear war than it has ever come before or since. Not in a government building, not in a war room, not between presidents or generals with their fingers on buttons. It happened in the dark, 300 meters below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, inside a Soviet submarine that had lost communication with Moscow, was running out of air, and believed it might already be at war. 3 men held the authority to launch a nuclear torpedo. 2 of them said yes. The third said no. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. Almost no one has heard of him. Almost everyone alive today owes him their life. To understand what happened below the ocean, you need to understand what was happening above it. In October 1962, American reconnaissance aircraft photographed Soviet nuclear missile installations under construction in Cuba, 90 miles from the Florida coast. President Kennedy imposed a naval blockade. Soviet ships carrying additional missiles were ordered to turn back or face interception. The world watched and waited. For 13 days, the United States and the Soviet Union stood at the edge of nuclear war. Historians later called it the Cuban Missile Crisis, the most dangerous confrontation of the Cold War, perhaps of all human history. What the public did not know, what remained classified for decades, was that beneath the American naval blockade, 4 Soviet submarines were already in position. Each carried conventional torpedoes, and one of them carried something else, a single nuclear torpedo with a yield equivalent to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The submarines had been ordered to surface if attacked, but if they could not surface, if they believed war had already begun, their commanding officers had the authority to launch. No further authorization from Moscow required. Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov was born on January 30th, 1926, in a small village outside Moscow. He joined the Soviet Navy at 17 and spent his career in submarines, a world of complete enclosure, absolute hierarchy, and total dependence on the judgment of the men around you. By 1962, he was 36 years old, a brigade chief of staff, and had already survived one nuclear incident that most people have never heard of. In 1961, Arkhipov had served as executive officer on the K-19, a Soviet nuclear submarine whose reactor cooling system failed during a mission. The crew was exposed to lethal doses of radiation, attempting to prevent a meltdown. 8 men died in the days that followed. Arkhipov helped manage the crisis, staying calm under conditions that destroyed other men. He had already looked at catastrophe once and held steady. In October 1962, he was assigned as flotilla commander aboard submarine B-59, one of the 4 vessels sent to Cuban waters. His rank meant that the captain of B-59 could not launch the nuclear torpedo without his consent. That detail would determine the fate of the world. Below the surface, the conditions inside B-59. By October 27, submarine B-59 had been submerged for days without surfacing. The conditions inside were becoming critical. The air temperature had reached 45 degrees Celsius in some compartments, over 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The batteries that powered the submarine were nearly depleted. Men were losing consciousness at their stations. They had received no communication from Moscow for days. They did not know the current status of negotiations. They did not know whether war had been declared. They did not know whether the world above the water still existed as they had left it. What they did know was that American naval forces had found them. Depth charges, non-lethal signaling charges, meant to force the submarine to surface, were exploding around the hull. To the men inside, in the heat and the silence and the depleted air, those explosions were indistinguishable from the beginning of a war. Captain Valentin Savitsky had reached his limit. He believed the war had started. He believed they were being attacked. He gave the order to prepare the nuclear torpedo for launch. The decision? The moment that changed everything. Under Soviet protocol, launching the nuclear torpedo required the agreement of 3 officers: the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commander. Captain Savitsky wanted to launch. He reportedly said, "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not disgrace our Navy." The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, agreed. 2 votes for nuclear launch. 1 remaining. Vasily Arkhipov said no. According to accounts from crew members who later spoke on the record, the exchange was not quiet. Savitsky was furious. The argument was conducted in the heat and the noise and the near suffocation of a submarine that had been underwater too long, surrounded by American warships, with no contact from home. Archipov's argument was simple. They had not received orders to launch. They did not have confirmed information that war had begun. The depth charges were signaling devices, not weapons. They should surface, make contact, and wait for instructions. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply held his position, calmly, repeatedly, under pressure that would have broken most people, until Savitsky agreed to surface. B-59 rose to the surface on October 27, 1962. It was surrounded immediately by American naval vessels. No torpedo was fired. No war began. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended in negotiated agreement 2 days later. What would have happened? The chain of consequences. It is worth pausing to consider what a yes vote would have meant. A nuclear torpedo launched at an American naval vessel in 1962 would have been interpreted as a Soviet nuclear first strike. The United States had nuclear weapons on alert, targeting Soviet cities. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons targeting American cities and American allies across Europe. Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive, later said, "A guy called Vasily Arkhipov saved the world." Arthur Schlesinger Jr., historian and advisor to President Kennedy, described the Cuban Missile Crisis as the most dangerous moment in human history. He was referring to the diplomatic crisis above the surface. He did not yet know about what had happened below it. That information remained classified for decades. The full story of B-59 did not become public until 2002, at a conference in Havana, marking the 40th anniversary of the crisis, when former participants on both sides finally spoke openly about what had occurred. By then, Vasily Arkhipov had been dead for 4 years. Vasily Arkhipov continued his naval career after 1962. He rose to the rank of Vice Admiral. He retired quietly. He lived in a small town outside Moscow with his wife, Olga. He never spoke publicly about what happened on B-59. The Soviet Union classified the incident. His role in it was unknown outside a small circle of naval officers for the rest of his life. His wife, Olga, later said that he had mentioned it to her, quietly, without drama, as something that had happened, something he had been part of. He did not present it as heroism. He presented it as a decision that had seemed, to him, simply correct. He died on August 19, 1998, at the age of 72. The cause was kidney failure, likely related to radiation exposure during the K-19 incident decades earlier. The world did not notice. There was no state funeral, no monument, no recognition of any kind. There is a particular kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. It does not charge forward. It does not make speeches. It does not announce itself. It simply holds still, in the heat, in the noise, in the pressure, in the face of two men who have already decided, and says, "Not yet. We do not know enough. We wait." Vasily Arkhipov was not a pacifist. He was a career military officer who had spent his life training for exactly the kind of moment he faced on October 27, 1962. He understood the weapons. He understood the stakes. He understood what his commanding officer was feeling and why. He said no anyway. Every person alive today, every child born since 1962, every city still standing, every ordinary morning that has passed without a nuclear exchange exists in a world that Vasily Arkhipov made possible with a single word in a hot, dark, oxygen-depleted room at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. He never knew. He never asked for recognition. He simply went home. That is what it looks like when one person saves the world.